Imagine standing on a cold, empty beach in 1903. The wind is howling across the sand dunes. Waves from the Atlantic crash loudly against the shore. There are no crowds, no cameras, no reporters. Just a strange wooden machine sitting on a narrow rail in the sand, and two quiet brothers preparing to attempt something the world believed was impossible. They weren't famous scientists. They weren't wealthy inventors. They were just two bicycle mechanics. And in a few moments, one of them would attempt something no human had ever successfully done before. If they failed, the machine would crash. If they succeeded, human history would change forever. Because on this cold December morning, Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright were about to attempt the very first powered flight in history. And the world had no idea it was about to leave the ground.
If you enjoy true historical stories and fascinating facts, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who loves history.
The wind howled across the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, on a cold December morning in 1903. Gray clouds hung low in the sky, and the Atlantic Ocean roared nearby as powerful waves crashed against the lonely coastline. The air was sharp and cold, and the wind blew sand across the beach in swirling patterns. Only a few people stood there that morning. There were no large crowds, no reporters with cameras, no cheering spectators waiting for history to be made. Just a small group of curious witnesses watching something unusual. In the middle of the sand dunes sat a strange wooden machine with wide cloth-covered wings. It rested on a narrow wooden rail that stretched across the sand. Standing beside the machine were two quiet brothers from Ohio. They were not famous inventors. They were not wealthy engineers backed by powerful investors. They were simply bicycle mechanics. Yet what they were about to attempt had been one of humanity's greatest dreams for thousands of years. For centuries, humans had looked up at birds flying effortlessly through the sky and wondered the same thing. Could people ever fly? Many had tried, almost all had failed, but on this cold morning in December, Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright believed they had finally solved the mystery. In just a few moments, one of them would climb onto the strange flying machine and attempt something that had never been successfully achieved before. If their machine failed, it would crash into the sand like every other experiment before it. But if it succeeded, human history would change forever. A dream born in childhood. The Wright brothers were born in the late 19th century and grew up in a modest home in Dayton, Ohio. Their family was not wealthy, but it valued curiosity, learning, and creativity. Their father, a traveling bishop, often brought home books and small toys for his children. One day he brought home something unusual. It was a small toy helicopter powered by twisted rubber bands. When the rubber band was wound tightly and then released, the toy's tiny propellers spun rapidly and lifted the small device into the air. It only stayed airborne for a few seconds before falling back to the ground, but for young Wilbur and Orville, those few seconds were magical. They watched the toy rise into the air again and again, fascinated by the idea that something built by human hands could lift itself off the ground. That tiny toy sparked a curiosity that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As they grew older, the brothers became deeply interested in mechanics, engineering, and invention. They loved building things and experimenting with different ideas. Neither brother attended college, but they were intelligent, determined, and endlessly curious about how the world worked. Eventually, they opened a small bicycle shop in Dayton. The bicycle shop that changed history. At first glance, their shop seemed ordinary. The brothers spent their days repairing bicycles, selling spare parts, and designing improved components for customers. But their work with bicycles was quietly teaching them important lessons. Bicycles require balance and control. A rider must constantly adjust their body position to keep the machine stable while moving. The Wright brothers became experts in understanding motion, balance, and mechanical design. Without realizing it, the simple work of repairing bicycles was preparing them to solve one of the greatest engineering challenges in history: the problem of flight. Learning from the pioneers. During the late 1800s, many inventors around the world were trying to build flying machines. The Wright brothers began studying the work of earlier aviation pioneers. One of the most important was the German engineer Otto Lilienthal. Lilienthal had successfully built gliders and completed hundreds of flights by gliding down hillsides. His work proved that human flight might actually be possible. However, in 1896, tragedy struck. Lilienthal crashed during one of his glider experiments and died from his injuries. His death shocked the world and reminded everyone how dangerous aviation experiments could be. Many people believed the dream of flight might simply be too risky or impossible, but the Wright brothers saw something different in Lilienthal's work. They saw proof that humans could glide through the air. They just needed to figure out how to control the machine. Solving the real problem. Most inventors focused on building larger wings or stronger engines, but the Wright brothers realized something others had overlooked. The real problem wasn't just lifting a machine into the air. The real problem was controlling it once it was flying. Without control, a flying machine would be unstable and dangerous. It would simply fall from the sky. The brothers began experimenting with a method they called wing warping, which allowed the pilot to twist the wing slightly to control the aircraft's balance and direction. This idea would eventually become one of the key breakthroughs in aviation. The experiments begin. In 1909, the Wright brothers began testing their ideas using small kites. They flew these kites to test how their wing control system worked in the air. Encouraged by the results, they began building larger gliders capable of carrying a pilot, but they needed a place with strong winds and wide open space. Eventually, they chose the remote sand dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The location was perfect for their experiments. Strong ocean winds helped lift their gliders into the air, while the soft sand made crashes less dangerous. For several years, the brothers traveled back and forth between Dayton and Kitty Hawk, building and testing new gliders. Sometimes their experiments worked beautifully, other times they failed completely, but the brothers never gave up. Instead, they carefully studied every mistake. The wind tunnel breakthrough. Back in their bicycle shop, the Wright brothers built something revolutionary: a small wind tunnel. Inside the wind tunnel, they tested hundreds of tiny wing chains to see how air flowed across them. They carefully measured lift, drag, and air pressure. Their experiments produced more accurate aerodynamic data than any previous research. With this new knowledge, they designed wings that were far more efficient than earlier attempts. They were now closer than ever to building a powered flying machine. Building the Wright Flyer. The next challenge was power. Engines in the early 1900s were far too heavy to lift into the air, so the Wright brothers decided to build their own engine. With the help of a skilled mechanic, they created a lightweight gasoline engine powerful enough to drive 2 wooden propellers. They then constructed a new aircraft. It had a wooden frame, fabric-covered wings, and a wingspan of about 40 feet. The pilot would lie flat on the wing to reduce air resistance. The aircraft used cables connected to the wings and rudder to control movement. They named their invention the Wright Flyer. After years of work, they were finally ready to test it. December 17, 1903. On the morning of December 17th, the brothers prepared the Flyer for its first powered flight. The cold wind blew steadily across the dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. A few local life-saving station workers gathered nearby to watch. The brothers flipped a coin to decide who would make the first attempt. Orville won. He climbed onto the lower wing and lay beside the engine controls. Wilbur stood beside the aircraft holding one wing steady.
The engine started. The propellers began spinning. Slowly, the flyer rolled forward along the wind-law trail. The machine gained speed. Then suddenly, it lifted off the ground. For 12 seconds, the aircraft flew through the air. It traveled about 120 feet before landing in the sand. The witnesses stared in disbelief. Human flight had finally happened. 4 flights that changed the world. The brothers made 3 more flights that morning. Each flight lasted longer than the last. During the final flight, Wilbur flew nearly 852 feet in 59 seconds. Human aviation had officially begun. Shortly after landing, a strong gust of wind flipped the flyer and damaged it beyond repair. But it didn't matter. The Wright brothers had already proven their point. A new age begins. At first, many people doubted their claims, but as the brothers continued improving their aircraft and demonstrating longer flights, the world slowly accepted the truth. The age of aviation had begun. Within a few decades, airplanes would transform the world. They would carry passengers across continents, deliver mail across oceans, and play important roles in wars and exploration. Today, millions of flights travel across the skies every year. Modern airplanes carry hundreds of passengers at incredible speeds, but every aircraft flying today owes its existence to one moment. A cold, windy morning in 1903, when 2 bicycle mechanics proved that humans could finally rise into the sky, and from that moment forward, the world would never be the same.